His world ran on logic, not love, until one day, a junior doctor he didn't even know existed saved the only thing he had left, his daughter. Before we continue, we ask you to support our channel by liking this video and subscribing. Your participation is essential for us to keep bringing you captivating stories like this one. The air inside King's Cross University Hospital in London was an entity unto itself, a sterile, complex symphony of antiseptic, the metallic tang of fear, and the almost imperceptible scent of hope. It was in this precise environment where life and death waged their daily war under the cold, unwavering glare of fluorescent lights that Mr. Alistair Finch reigned. At 42, he was the lead consultant of general surgery, a living legend in the hallowed halls of the institution, a man whose brilliant mind, surgical precision, and relentless methodology were as revered as his profound inability to display emotion. For Alistair, the operating theatre was a sanctuary of logic and control, the human body, an intricate machine to be mended with maximum efficiency and minimal sentimental involvement. Feelings, he fervently believed, were undesirable variables, dangerous distractions that clouded judgment and compromised outcomes. This philosophy, however, was not confined to the walls of the hospital. It was the very architecture of his existence, an armor of ice he wore to shield himself from the unpredictable chaos of the world, and most of all, from himself. This glacial shell was not innate. It had been forged in the crucible of excruciating pain, a grief that time had callously refused to soften. Alistair was a widower. His wife, Eleanor, the only woman who had ever managed to decipher the codes of his complex soul and who had taught him how to laugh at his own severity, had died tragically during the birth of their only child, Poppy, 6 years prior. A rare, unforeseeable complication had stolen Eleanor away, leaving behind a shattered man and a motherless newborn. From that fateful day, Alistair had sealed himself within a cocoon of obsessive work and ironclad discipline, transmuting his grief into a ceaseless quest for professional perfection, as if each life he saved on the operating table could somehow atone for the one life he couldn't, the one that mattered most. He raised Poppy with the same methodology he used to manage his department, with rigid routines, clear rules, and a kind of affectionate coldness that provided everything materially necessary but failed utterly to offer the warmth, the spontaneity, the sheer, messy vulnerability a developing soul so desperately needs. In this house, as in my theatre, there is no room for surprise, no margin for error, and above all, feelings only impede the smooth running of things. It was a line he delivered not only to his team of junior doctors, but also to himself, a mantra repeated to the point of exhaustion, a futile attempt to command his own. Heart to stop aching. Little Poppy Finch, however, with the intuitive wisdom and resilience of the very young, sensed the profound sadness hiding behind her father's rigid facade. At 6 years old, she was a girl of infectious sweetness, with her mother's large, expressive eyes and a fertile imagination that turned the silent corners of their immaculate Kensington townhouse into fairy tale landscapes. She would spend hours in her room, her sketchbooks filled with vibrant, happy worlds, always populated by smiling families and invariably overflowing with hearts, large and small, in every color of the rainbow. Her drawings were a silent manifestation of her yearning, a craving for a more explicit affection, for a louder joy. And sometimes, in her bravest moments, she would try to breach her father's wall of ice with disarming questions that struck him with the precision of a scalpel, exposing the wounds he worked so hard to conceal. "Daddy," she asked one evening, as he was tucking her into bed with the efficiency of a nurse following a protocol, "why don't you ever laugh for real? The loud kind, where your eyes crinkle up like Mum's did in the photos." The question, so simple in its phrasing and so devastating in its implications, hung in the air of the impeccably tidy room, leaving Alistair momentarily speechless, his heart seized by an old pain and a guilt he didn't know how to name. Joy, for him, had become a foreign language, one he had long forgotten. How to speak. In a parallel universe within that same King's Cross University hospital, moving through the bustling corridors like a quiet, almost invisible shadow, was Isla Barnes. At 25, she was the personification of a silent passion for medicine and the resilience of someone who had fought for every single achievement. The daughter of stallholders from Borough Market, Isla had grown up amidst the aroma of fresh pies and artisanal cheese, learning from a young age the value of hard work and perseverance. Her journey to medical school had been an odyssey of sacrifice, juggling exhaustive studies with part-time jobs to help support her family. Her arrival at the renowned King's Cross as a Foundation Year 1, F1 junior doctor was the culmination of a lifelong dream, and she dedicated herself to her post with a seriousness and humility that set her apart from her more competitive, boisterous colleagues. Quiet and introspective, she rarely partook in the frivolous chatter or gossip that permeated the hospital's culture. She preferred to observe, to learn, to absorb every detail, every procedure, every human interaction. And she possessed a rare, almost intuitive gift, a talent not found in medical textbooks, the ability to truly listen. She listened not only to the words patients spoke, but to what their silences, their gestures, their gazes revealed. She saw the pain behind a brave face, the fear behind a nervous joke, the fragile hope behind a grim diagnosis. Most of the senior consultants and registrars, including the almighty Mr. Alistair Finch, Isla Barnes was just another anonymous face in the crowd of young doctors in training, a functional figure whose primary task was to fill out patient charts, chase up lab results, carry out orders, and above all, not get in the way. Her name was rarely remembered, her presence almost always overlooked, until that morning. It was a particularly chaotic morning in the A&E department. The shrill wail of ambulance sirens was a constant soundtrack. Trolleys lined the corridors, and the medical team rushed from one crisis to the next in a frantic, stressful ballet of triage and treatment. Amidst that organized chaos, while on her way to the lab to deliver blood samples, Isla noticed a little girl sitting alone on a chair in the waiting area, visibly frightened and unwell. The child was waxen pale, her lips beginning to acquire a dangerous blue tint, and her breathing was short, shallow, and accompanied by a high-pitched wheeze. She was trembling uncontrollably, her big scared eyes fixed on some point on the ceiling. Without knowing that this was Poppy, the daughter of the head of surgery, Isla acted on pure medical and human instinct. She approached the girl with a calmness that contrasted sharply with the surrounding bedlam, ignoring the rigid protocols that forbade her from taking any initiative without the direct supervision of a senior doctor. With a few precise questions, and observing the red, swollen welts beginning to appear on the child's neck and face, she immediately recognized the classic signs of a severe allergic reaction, anaphylactic shock, which she knew could escalate to cardiorespiratory arrest in a matter of minutes. Without hesitating for a single precious second, she rushed to the nearest crash cart, which was conveniently stocked, grabbed a preloaded EpiPen, and with a steady hand and a precision that would impress any seasoned surgeon, administered the life-saving dose of adrenaline into the girl's small thigh. Simultaneously, she called out to a passing nurse in a tone that brooked no argument, "Get the pediatric crash team down here, now!" Isla's action, swift, decisive, and technically perfect, interrupted the allergic cascade and saved Poppy's life. Alistair Finch arrived in A&E like a hurricane, his heart hammering against his ribs, his face pale with a panic he hadn't felt since the day he lost his wife. He had received a rushed, somewhat garbled call from Poppy's school. informing him that she'd had a sudden and very severe allergic reaction to something in her lunch and was being rushed by ambulance to the hospital. Running through the corridors he knew so well, which now felt like a labyrinth of anguish, he found his daughter already stabilized, lying on a trolley in a pediatric bay. Her breathing was calmer, the color gradually returning to her face, under the watchful care of the on-call pediatrician. The relief that washed over him was so overwhelming, so intense, it nearly buckled his knees. After assuring himself that Poppy was in fact out of danger, his mind, trained for cold analysis, for root causes and the assignment of responsibility, reverted to its default mode. Who attended to her first? Who provided the initial aid when she arrived? He demanded of the pediatrician, his voice still edged with an authoritarian urgency, the relief giving way to his intrinsic need for control. The title doctor, who was just finishing listening to the girl's chest, glanced around. It was one of the F1s, he replied, after a brief word with a nurse who had witnessed the scene. Her name is Dr. Barnes. Yes, Isla Barnes. A very sharp girl, Mr. Finch. Recognized the anaphylaxis immediately and administered the adrenaline before I was even paged. Her action, without a doubt, was decisive. It saved your daughter from far more severe complications. Alistair frowned. The name meant nothing to him, which only fueled his irritation at not having control over his own daughter's care. In a tone that was more command than request, he asked for the junior doctor to be summoned. When Isla appeared at the entrance to the bay, still slightly breathless, her face flushed from the adrenaline of the moment, he stared at her with a cold, interrogating expression, a father's relief usurped by the arrogance of a department head. "Dr. Barnes," he said, the title doctor sounding almost like an insult. On his lips, "I'm told it was you who attended to my daughter, and that you administered a high-risk medication without the express supervision or authorization of a senior consultant. Have you, by chance, forgotten the basic protocols of this hospital? You were not authorized to act alone." Isla, who had perhaps naively expected a word of thanks, or at least an acknowledgement of her deed, felt a chill run down her spine at the coldness and implicit accusation in Mr. Finch's voice. For a moment, the fear of having violated the sacred rules of the medical hierarchy, of facing severe punishment for her initiative, of seeing her dream of becoming a doctor tarnished by a note of insubordination in her file, paralyzed her. The sheer injustice of the accusation coming from the father of the child whose life she had just saved took her breath away. But then she looked at little Poppy, now breathing peacefully on the trolley, her eyes beginning to flutter open, and an unexpected strength, an unshakable conviction in her own actions and in her oath to protect life above all else, filled her. She lifted her chin, met Alistair's icy, accusatory gaze, and replied, her voice calm, firm, and devoid of any trace of fear or subservience, a voice that seemed to come from a place of pure professional and human certainty. "Mr. Finch, with all the respect your position commands, I did not have authorization to wait. And you, as a surgeon, know better than anyone that in certain situations, seconds are the difference between life and death. Had I waited for authorization, had I followed bureaucratic protocol and searched for a senior doctor amidst the chaos of A&E, your daughter would likely have suffered a complete glottal edema and gone into respiratory arrest before any responsible physician could have reached her. I acted as a doctor, sir, and I acted as a human being who saw a child suffocating. And no, I do not regret it for a single second." Her words, so direct, so logical, so irrefutable, landed on Alistair like a physical blow, silencing his arrogance and his need for control. He, the master of logic, the god of the operating theatre, the man who always had the right answer and the final word, found himself completely disarmed by the simple, unassailable truth from this junior doctor he had never before noticed. He opened his mouth to retort, to reassert his authority, to find some flaw in her reasoning, but no words came. Only a heavy, dense, and uncomfortable silence settled between them, a silence more powerful and more eloquent than any response he could have mustered. Without another word, feeling strangely diminished and exposed, he turned abruptly and walked away, his heart beating erratically, no longer from panic for his daughter, but from a new and profoundly unsettling emotion, the stark realization that he had been a hair's breadth from losing everything he had left in the world, and that he had been saved not by his wealth or his power, but by the courage, intuition, and competence of an anonymous junior doctor whom, until that very moment, he would have treated with complete and utter indifference. The tense, revelatory encounter in the A&E department had planted a seed in the meticulously ordered mind of Alistair Finch. The image of Isla Barnes, her steady posture, her calm voice, her irrefutable and courageous logic, had etched itself into his memory. He could no longer see her as just another anonymous F1 doctor. She had become a presence, a question mark in his predictable, hierarchical, and controlled universe, driven by a curiosity he couldn't quite define, a blend of reluctant admiration, a flicker of gratitude he didn't know how to express, and perhaps even a touch of the intellectual intimidation he hadn't felt in years. He began to observe her, discreetly, from a distance, in the bustling hospital corridors, during his morning rounds on the wards, in the rare, brief pauses for a bitter coffee in the staff canteen. His eyes would, almost of their own accord, seek her out in the sea of white coats and blue scrubs, analyzing her gestures, her interactions, her way of being in the world. And what he saw each day only deepened his intrigue. Isla Barnes was a walking paradox in that often cynical, competitive, and dehumanized environment. He saw her treating the most elderly patients, those whom many doctors had already written off as bed blockers, with an infinite patience and gentleness, listening to their rambling, repetitive stories with a genuine interest, as if they were the most important people in the world. He witnessed from afar, and without her noticing, the way she defended, with a surprising firmness and quiet courage, other more timid junior doctors when they were treated rudely by an arrogant registrar or an impatient senior consultant. And he observed, with a growing, almost voyeuristic fascination, the tenderness with which she interacted with the children on the pediatric ward, her innate ability to transform a frightening examination room into a stage for fantastic adventures, her soft voice soothing the fears of her small patients with an efficacy that seemed almost magical. He could no longer ignore her. Isla Barnes, the invisible doctor, had become, for him, the most visible, most intriguing, and most magnetic presence in the entire hospital. Alistair's curiosity, at first a distant, passive, and analytical observation, soon morphed into a need for interaction, to test, to better understand this woman who had both challenged his logic and saved his world. He began, subtly and almost unconsciously, to create opportunities for their paths to cross more frequently. One day, passing the medical admissions unit where she was on duty, he called out to her with a formality that barely concealed his true interest. "Dr. Barnes, a word, if you're not terribly busy." Isla, who was updating a patient's electronic records, looked up, surprised by the direct approach from the head of surgery. She approached him with professional caution, still uncertain of the intentions of this powerful, feared, and to her, entirely unpredictable man. "Yes, Mr. Finch. How can I help you?" "I'd like you to scrub in with me for this afternoon's surgery," he said, without preamble, as if it were the most natural invitation in the world. "A pancreaticoduodenectomy, a complex case. It will be a valuable learning experience." The offer caught her, completely off guard. F1 doctors, especially those on a medical rotation, were rarely invited to observe, let alone scrub in on, a highly complex procedure with the lead consultant, unless they had distinguished themselves exceptionally or had a special recommendation. Me, sir, but why me? Surely there are surgical registrars or senior house officers who would benefit more. He met her gaze with those piercing blue eyes, a faint, enigmatic smile touching the corner of his lips. Because, Dr. Barnes, after what I witnessed in A&E, I find myself genuinely curious to see what else you notice before everyone else does. I consider your rapid diagnostic eye a rare talent, one worth studying more closely. Besides, he added, with an irony so subtle she couldn't tell if it was a joke or a test, I could use a second opinion on my technique. The invitation, framed as both an intellectual challenge and a unique learning opportunity, was impossible to refuse. And so, that afternoon, Ela found herself standing beside Alistair Finch in the cold, sterile, high-tech environment of the main operating theatre. She was no longer an anonymous, invisible junior doctor, but the invited observer of the god of that sacred temple of medicine. And to the surprise of both, the synergy between them during the procedure was flawless, a silent dance of questions, answers, observations, and a mutual respect that grew with every suture, every critical decision made. While the professional and intellectual relationship between Alistair and Isla began to form in subtle, complex strokes within the hospital's walls, another bond, pure, spontaneous, and utterly uncomplicated, was blossoming with a radiant and healing light. That of little Poppy for her savior, the kind doctor with the soft voice and gentle hands. The girl, who had recovered completely from the severe allergic reaction, had not for a moment forgotten the serene face and reassuring calm of the young doctor who had soothed her in her moment of greatest panic. She began to ask her father constantly, with an adorable childish insistence, to see Isla, to visit her in the hospital corridors during her follow-up appointments, or simply to give her a colourful drawing as a sincere and heartfelt thank you. Alistair, who at first felt a little awkward about using his daughter as a pretext to get closer to the young doctor, eventually gave in to Poppy's insistent pleas, perhaps because deep down he also longed for these encounters, for these small breaches of human warmth in his cold, solitary routine. These meetings, always brief and seemingly casual, taking place in corridors, the canteen or the hospital garden, became small oases of normality and affection in the lives of all three. Poppy, with her disarming innocence and infectious joy, became, without knowing it, the most effective little accomplice in this unlikely and, to many, inappropriate rapprochement. One day, during one of these visits, she handed Isla one of her latest drawings, created with special care and attention. The picture, rendered in vibrant wax crayon, depicted three smiling figures holding hands under a huge, equally smiling sun. A tall man with dark hair in a white coat, a woman with long hair and a very sweet smile, and a little girl in the middle with a ribbon in her hair. "This is my new family, Isla," the girl announced, using Isla's first name with a familiarity that was both touching and startling. "Can it be? Can we be a proper family like this, for real?" Isla felt her face flush, her heart pounding in a mixture of tenderness, joy, and an almost painful embarrassment. She glanced at Alistair, who was observing the scene with an unreadable expression. She saw a slight, almost imperceptible smile touch his lips as he feigned an adjustment of the glasses he didn't actually need to wear. The silence that followed was filled with a universe of possibilities, of fears and hopes that neither of the two, adults, yet dared to verbalize. The bond between the three was indelibly strengthened one pleasant, sunny afternoon during a completely impromptu picnic in the hospital's small but well-tended and surprisingly tranquil garden, a green sanctuary amidst the city's concrete jungle. The idea, of course, had been Poppy's, who had insisted with captivating stubbornness on thanking Isla in a very, very special way for taking such good care of her. And so, to Isla's surprise, and to some extent, Alistair's own, The three of them found themselves sitting on a checkered blanket on the grass, sharing simple cheese and pickle sandwiches bought from the hospital cafe and juice from a carton, in a scene that seemed lifted from a romantic comedy, so far removed from the usual, complex reality of their individual lives. Poppy, who usually communicated with the world through the screen of her tablet, was more talkative and cheerful than ever, telling Isla with impressive detail and a fertile imagination all about her favorite dinosaurs and their dream adventures. Alistair, for his part, remained quieter than usual, but it was a different kind of silence, not of indifference or distance, but of attentive observation, of a serene and almost wondrous absorption of the scene. He watched the way Isla interacted with his daughter, the infinite patience with which she listened to her fantastical stories, the genuineness of her laugh when Poppy said something particularly funny. He saw in her not just a competent doctor, but a woman with an innate capacity to nurture, to care, to generate affection. At one point, Poppy, with the solemnity of someone performing a great rite, picked up a bright red apple from the picnic basket and offered it to Ayla with both her small hands. "Here, Ayla, this one's for you, because you're the first person I've ever seen in my whole life who can make Daddy really smile and stop looking at his phone like it's more important than me." The child's comment, so innocent in its formulation and yet so accurate and devastating in its truth, struck Alistair and Isla with the force of a small, silent revelation. It left them both momentarily speechless, without reaction, only exchanging a quick, fleeting glance, charged with a deep and complex meaning that neither of them in that moment dared to decipher or to name. The forced proximity of the hospital, now deliberately nurtured by the charming and growing complicity with little Poppy, inevitably began to spill beyond the exhaustive shifts, sterile corridors, and casual canteen encounters. Alistair, driven by a growing need and an attraction he could no longer disguise or deny to himself, started seeking out Isla outside of work hours, with pretexts that became increasingly transparent and at times endearingly clumsy. First, it was an invitation for a quick coffee in a charming Bloomsbury cafe near the hospital, under the guise of discussing a complex clinical case where he valued her incisive opinion. Then, it was a dinner invitation to a discreet, welcoming gastropub in Islington, far from the sophisticated circles and prying eyes he usually frequented, with the excuse of needing to thank her properly for the kindness she showed his daughter. Isla, though still slightly intimidated by the intensity of his attention and wary of his true intentions, found herself increasingly unable to resist the genuine sincerity he now showed her, to her immense and growing surprise. She discovered that, stripped of his armor as a formidable surgeon and the mask of an arrogant and unapproachable consultant, Alistair Finch was a surprisingly engaging man. He possessed a dry, intelligent wit she was beginning to find irresistibly charming, and a hidden vulnerability that moved her in a way she never imagined possible. They laughed together, over trivial things, over the small idiosyncrasies of hospital life, over funny stories from their vastly different childhoods. With every meeting, every conversation, the layers of ice around Alistair's heart seemed to melt a little more, and the walls of fear around Isla's began to show their first, most promising cracks. "You know, Isla, you're not at all what I expected," he confessed during one of these dinners, his gaze locked on hers over a glass of wine, his voice devoid of its usual formality. "I expected another awestruck junior doctor, or perhaps a sycophant eager to please the department head. Instead, I found a woman who challenges me intellectually, intrigues me emotionally, and fascinates me completely." Isla smiled, a smile that now came more freely, with more confidence. "And you, Mr. Finch, she replied, a playful tone in her voice but palpable sincerity in her eyes, "are infinitely more complex and interesting than the cold, arrogant man who hides behind that impeccable suit and the reputation of a surgical deity." Their approach was a slow, careful dance, a step forward, two to the side. A tango of advances and retreats, both testing the ground, measuring the distance, afraid of getting burned, but with a growing, almost uncontrollable desire to warm themselves in each other's presence. The first real touch, one that was not professional, nor accidental, nor mediated by Poppy's presence, happened during a long, revealing walk along the South Bank on a mild evening, after a particularly grueling shift for both. They spoke of their deepest fears, their most painful losses. Alistair, for the first time in his adult life, opened up completely about the paralyzing, ever-present grief he felt after Eleanor's death, about the visceral fear of getting attached to someone again, only to suffer an unbearable new loss. "I'm so afraid of letting anyone in again, Isla," he confessed, his voice low and thick with an emotion he no longer tried to hide, as he looked out at the city lights shimmering on the Thames. "I've already lost the person I loved most in the world. I don't think I could survive it a second time. It's easier, safer, to feel nothing at all." Isla, seeing the genuine pain in the eyes of this seemingly unbreakable man, felt an overwhelming surge of compassion. Without thinking, simply following her heart's intuition, she reached out and took his hand. It was a simple gesture, yet it was loaded with immense, transformative meaning. His hand was large and warm, and he, surprised by the gesture, squeezed hers with a force that was both grateful and desperate, like a drowning man finally finding a life raft in a storm. "Then, Alistair," she said, her voice as soft as a balm, "we don't have to rush. We walk slowly, one step at a time, together, and if one of us stumbles, the other will be here to help them up." In that moment, hands clasped under the London sky, they were no longer consultant and junior doctor, rich and poor, cynic and idealist. They were just a man and a woman, two wounded souls who had perhaps found in each other the rare and precious chance to begin again. However, in an environment as intrinsically hierarchical and prone to malicious gossip as a major teaching hospital, the undeniable bond between the feared head of surgery and a junior doctor could not go unnoticed. The news of the involvement between Mr. Finch and his protégé spread through the wards and staff rooms like a virus, fueled by the envy of colleagues who coveted the consultant's attention and the idle malice of others. Snide remarks and insinuations about the real reasons for Isla's sudden visibility became common, wounding her deeply but never shaking her professional focus. The situation reached a breaking point when the hospital trust, pressured by a few conservative, old-guard consultants uneasy with the breach of decorum, decided to intervene. Alistair and Isla were summoned via a cold, impersonal email to a formal meeting with the clinical director and the head of HR. The atmosphere in the boardroom was tense, the discourse formal and loaded with unquestionable authority. "Mr. Finch, Dr. Barnes," the director began, his voice devoid of empathy, "it has been brought to the Trust's attention that a relationship exists between you that regrettably goes far beyond the bounds of what is professionally and ethically acceptable within this institution." He paused, shuffling papers on the table. "As you should know, the Trust's internal regulations expressly forbid romantic or intimate relationships between hierarchical superiors and their direct subordinates to avoid conflicts of interest, claims of favoritism, and to preserve the integrity of the working environment. Therefore," he continued, his gaze fixing on them, "the situation as it stands is untenable. The solution is singular and final. Either one of you voluntarily resigns from the hospital, or we will be forced to take the most drastic disciplinary measures, which would be detrimental to both of your careers." The words fell on Isla, like a death sentence for her dreams. The fear of losing her place, of having her career destroyed before it had even begun, paralyzed her. It was her fault. She was the problem. Before Alistair, who had been listening with a simmering rage, could even articulate a defense, it was Isla who spoke, her voice trembling but her dignity intact. "Director," she said, "I understand the hospital's position. I would never wish to be the cause of any trouble for Mr. Finch or this institution. He has his brilliant career, his reputation, his daughter who depends on him. He is indispensable to this hospital. I am just an F1 doctor. There are hundreds like me. The decision is simple. To prevent any harm to Mr. Finch, I will resign my post. I will formalize it today." Alistair turned to her, his blue eyes flashing with an indignation and a protective fire she had never seen. "No, absolutely not," he said, his voice low and decisive, reaching out to touch her face with a tenderness that made her heart leap. "You will not go anywhere, Isla. You will not give up your dream because of some antiquated rule and small-minded people." "But Alistair, what can we do?" she whispered, torn between fear and overwhelming gratitude. He looked at her, the decision already made, certainty shining in his eyes. "What do? We don't run. We don't hide. We fight. Together." And fight is exactly what Alistair Finch did. The next day, to the astonishment of the entire hospital leadership, he, the most prestigious and until then apolitical consultant, convened an emergency meeting with the hospital trust's board of governors. He walked into the imposing boardroom not as a subordinate coming to explain himself, but with the glacial calm of a surgeon entering a high-stakes operation. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice calm, but resonating with an authority that came from pure conviction. "I was informed yesterday that due to my personal relationship with Dr. Isla Barnes, one of the most brilliant and promising doctors I have ever had the privilege to know, one of us must leave this institution for an archaic and, in my opinion, hypocritical rule to be upheld." He paused, looking at each board member in turn. "I am here today to tell you that if that is the condition, if that is the only solution you can envision to preserve Dr. Barnes's honor and professional future, then you can have my resignation. Here and now, I will not, under any circumstance, abandon the woman who made me feel again, who reminded me what it means to be human, who taught me more about the true essence of medicine in a few months than I learned in my entire career. If the price for loving and respecting this extraordinary woman is my position, I pay it gladly and without a shred of regret." His speech, so unexpected, so vehement, so raw with genuine emotion, left the board in stunned silence. They were prepared for a negotiation, a power play, not a public declaration of love and principle. From the cold, pragmatic Mr. Finch, after a long, tense moment, it was the chairman of the trust, Sir Reginald Hargreaves, a wise, respected old man who had known Alistair since he was a young, arrogant registrar, who spoke, his eyes moist with an emotion he didn't bother to hide. "Alistair, my boy," he said, his voice thick, "in all my years, I have never heard you speak with such passion. We are not going to lose you, Alistair. You are the heart of this hospital. And frankly, after hearing you, we cannot afford to lose a young doctor with the character of Dr. Barnes either. Perhaps it is we, the old guard, who are wrong. Perhaps it's time we tore up this outdated page in our rulebook and started trusting the integrity of our professionals rather than hiding behind cold rules that, as we now see, can cause profound injustice." The chairman's decision, endorsed by a majority of the board, was a landmark moment in the history of King's Cross University Hospital, and a resounding victory for the love and dignity of Alistair Finch and Isla Barnes. From that day forward, a new era began. The story of the board meeting spread, turning Alistair and Isla into a modern legend, an inspiring symbol that justice and integrity could prevail. And Alistair truly changed. The cold surgeon gave way to a generous mentor and an inspiring leader. He smiled more, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. And most importantly, he became a fierce advocate for junior doctors, establishing mentorship programs and support systems. His new motto being, "Talent and compassion know no hierarchy." Dr. Isla Barnes taught me that. His personal life blossomed. He and Poppy became closer than ever, sharing moments of joy that healed them both. One afternoon, as the three of them prepared invitations for Isla's upcoming graduation party, Poppy, with her charming logic, handed Isla a small box. "Isla, here are the invitations for our wedding. You are marrying Daddy, Aunt." "You? I've already told all my friends at school you're going to be my new mum." Alistair, overhearing from the kitchen, let out a loud, sonorous, happy laugh, the kind that was now so frequent in his life. "Well, my darling, it seems I've just been relieved of the honor of proposing to the love of my life. You are far more efficient than I am." Despite Poppy's charming proposal, Alistair made sure to do it properly. On a weekend trip to a rustic cottage in the Cotswolds, under a sky full of stars, he took her hands in his. "Isla," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "when you walked into my life, you didn't just save my daughter. You started saving me. You saved the man I had buried alive." He pulled out a small velvet box, revealing a simple, elegant ring with a single, delicate blue sapphire, the exact color of his eyes. "I know I am not an easy man, but I also know, with a certainty I have never felt for anything, that I do not want to live a single day of the rest of my life without you by my side. Isla Barnes, will you marry me?" Through tears of pure, overwhelming happiness, with a radiant smile that outshone the stars, she said the most certain yes of her life. Several years later, Sophia Serrano, now Dr. Isla Castillo Finch, is a respected and beloved pediatric consultant at King's Cross, known for her empathy and skill. Alistair, while still a leading surgeon, has found a deeper purpose. He now heads the Eleanor Finch Foundation, a charity he created in his late wife's memory, offering top-tier medical care to underserved communities across London. Poppy, now a vibrant, confident 10-year-old, is the radiant symbol of their new family, living proof that love is the most powerful of all remedies. The final scene unfolds on a lazy Sunday afternoon in the garden of their home in Richmond, with a view of the ancient oaks in the park. Alistair, dressed in casual clothes, is laughing freely as he and Poppy kick a football around the lawn. He is no longer the frozen man from the hospital corridors. He is a present father, a loving husband, a complete human being. Isla watches them from a comfortable chair on the patio, a book of poetry resting in her lap, her face a portrait of serene happiness. She feels a wave of gratitude so immense it's almost breathtaking, and in a whisper, more to herself than to the world, a thought summarizes the beautiful, impossible simplicity of her journey. "I only wanted to be a doctor. I wanted to care for people, to save lives. But in the end, in a way I could never have predicted, I healed a heart, and in the process, without even realizing it, I saved my own."